Aloha. O wau no ho'i o Leonesa anga, ki ke iki a David Lau Angeline, no hau'ula Hawaii mai iau. O wau no ho'i ke ka ho'olau kai no ka papahana o ka po'epa ki pika ma ne'ino ma UVU. I'm Leonesa Anga. I am the daughter of David and Angeline Keho. I am from Hau'ula, Hawaii, and I am currently the program director for our Pacific Islander Initiative here at UVU in our Multicultural Student Services Center. Welcome. Aloha. I am also honored here on behalf of our Native American, my Native American colleagues as well as cousins to represent them here as they're not able to be here today. And it is our responsibility to acknowledge to all who meet with us here at Utah Valley University that we gather on land that is sacred, to all indigenous peoples who come before us in this vast crossroads of the Utes, Goshutes, Paiutes, Shoshone, Navajo, and Hopi peoples and their ancestors. It has been their stewardship for time immemorial to care for this land and for its inhabitants, both two- and four-legged, winged, and waterbound. We honor their physical presence in our state today, their ancestral presence here in spirit, and their memory in our reverence for the resilience in preserving their connections to the Creator. Also, as a Native Hawaiian who is not indigenous to this land, but as part of our community here at Utah Valley University, and also cousin to the Maori people of where Melissa serves currently right now, I am representing not our Maori people, but I am representing our Pacific Island people as a Native Polynesian. And so this morning, I'd like to gift you. Normally, we would have lei here if we were in Hawaii, but if not, I will gift you with an oli lei that we share with you for all those who visit us, whether it be on my homelands in Hawaii or whether it be wherever I may be as a representative of Native Indigenous culture. So, mahalo.
Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. And I just want you to notice in this space how culture shapes how we feel and how it shapes what we bring into the room. So thank you, Leone, for what you brought into the room. So I'm very honored to be a guest at UVU and in this land. I'd like to tell you a little bit about where I come from to situate myself and my ideas in time, space, and memory. My own family story involves many layers of sojourning, visiting, invading, and settling. My mother's ancestors are from South China, around the Pearl River Delta, and they were primarily farmers. My father's ancestors are from southern Japan, the island of Kyushu, where they were samurai, farmers, and merchants. And around the turn of the 20th century, my great-grandparents crossed the Pacific Ocean. My Chinese great-grandparents came here to Utah, and they became farmers, vegetable farmers. And there they met the Latter-day Saints, and everyone except for my great-grandfather was baptized into the church. Eventually, they bought a farm in California and moved to California. Not very far from Knott's Berry Farm, actually, if you know where Knott's Berry Farm is. And my Japanese great-grandparents crossed the ocean and went to Northern California, and there they farmed various crops, including strawberries. Now, in 1937, Japan invaded China. My great-grandfather, Jin Gorju, began building model wooden submarines at his farm in a big pond, so that he dreamed of creating technology that would help drive the Japanese from his homeland. After Pearl Harbor, the President of the United States signed an executive order that ordered the forced removal and incarceration of all Japanese Americans living close to the coast. So my great-grandparents and their American-born children were forced to abandon their homes and farms, taking nothing more than what they could carry in each hand. They were sent to a prison camp in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, and after the war, with nothing, they had to start all over again. They found work in central United States, and that's where they met the Latter-day Saints in Utah. Now, my parents met each other at the fabled BYU Asian Ward, and the rest is history. So this little introduction and also the beautiful welcome that we had from Leona today helps us think about our positionality. And I hope that this presentation and the subsequent panel discussion that we'll have later on will help us further understand how people's expectations, cultural experiences, and shared memories affect what they get out of and what they put into religion. So the name of my talk today is called Vital Contagion, a Microbiological Approach to Mormonism. And I just like to start with a statement. I just want you to look at this statement, and I'm going to watch your faces as you react to this statement. Okay, so I saw reactions. So I'll just read it. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, men have the priesthood, but women who are naturally spiritual have even greater influence through service and church callings, sermons from the pulpit, and nurturing children. Now, all scholars who have spent time investigating the topic of women and authority within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have heard this statement or some variation of it many times. From a Western feminist point of view, this statement is an argument of compensation. The church's formal structures for declaring doctrine, setting policy, and adjudicating individuals' membership status are restricted to men. Therefore, one might conclude, Latter-day Saint women's charismatic activities and social influence at the grassroots do not measure up to a standard of gender equality or meaningful parity between men's and women's influence. From a position that values formal hierarchical authority as the only meaningful indicator of power within a religious organization, statements like the one above deserve an exasperated roll of the eyes. And indeed, I saw many eye rolls. But in this presentation, I would like to challenge, or at least moderate, this eye roll, this automatic dismissal of Latter-day Saint women's power, using the case study of women within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and drawing on a range of perspectives from existing scholarship in Mormon studies, the study of lived religion, the study of organizations, and sociology and anthropology. A narrow focus on the visible, vertical structures of religious organizations and participation ignores the complexity of intra-organizational dynamics. Structural power is not the only systematic power at work within a religious community. And for me, the difficulty of arguing for the significance of women's informal or less visible power within a patriarchal religion is that this tag is annoyingly similar to that taken by people who really haven't thought critically about women and internal religious dynamics, but who simply want to defend the status quo within the church about women's exclusion from administrative authority. So to them, there's this essential distinction between vertical authority, which they say is definitely male, inherently male, and horizontal authority, which they say is inherently female. And this view, too, is flawed. Structures of vertical, by which I mean highly visible, official, and horizontal, by which I mean less visible and informal authority, are not inherently gendered. Yet it would be a mistake to assume that because women often act within horizontal or less visible systems of power, these hidden systems are insignificant. And actually, right now, I'm sitting in front of 4 women in my family who are very powerful and who are actually kind of intimidating me. So my aunties, my cousin, and my adopted grandmother, Popo, who are 4 very powerful women. And I can feel the weight of their power right now. So in this paper, I use a loose analogy of microbiological systems in the human body to argue for the significance of horizontal, or less visible, systems of power within religious organizations, and by extension, the significance of women's influence within formally patriarchal frameworks. And the particular case study of Latter-day Saint women, both historically and in the present, powerfully demonstrates how even in the most hierarchically oriented collective religious projects, these projects depend on other powerful systems to survive and thrive. And by challenging the eye roll, a reaction that I will admit has often characterized my own response as a feminist and practicing Latter-day Saint, I seek to broaden the ways in which scholars conceptualize the participation of actors with little formal power in highly centralized hierarchical religious organizations. My insistence on the gravity of women's influence, even within a patriarchal religious organization, is in the same vein as Saba Mahmood's goal in her study of Egyptian Muslim women to, quote, redress the profound inability within current feminist political thought to envision valuable forms of human flourishing outside the bounds of a liberal progressive imaginary. The work of Mahmood and other scholars, such as Catherine Breckus, convincingly demonstrates that within patriarchal contexts, such as Islam and Mormonism, women exercise agency and develop capacity as they cultivate moral discipline and maintain social structures and norms. Now, in this presentation, my focus is not agency, but influence. The power not only to make choices for oneself, but to make choices that shape the lives, experiences, and expectations of others. Just as we would be simpletons to insist that the only thing that mattered about human life was having a skeleton clothed with muscles and sinew, we must not narrow our understanding of religion to formal administrative structures alone. As the science of the human body has shown, what determines human survival and vitality is much more than a person's upright posture and muscle mass. Many of the body's internal systems, invisible to the eye, play a major role in physical survival, well-being, and identity, although these essential processes are incredibly complex. For example, immune and autoimmune responses can be the source of healing, illness, chronic pain, and dramatic survival. Mouth bacteria have recently been linked to Alzheimer's disease, and the balance of gut flora may be related to colon cancer occurrence. Memories of diving into cold water on summer days are not stored like a book on a shelf, but are actively reconstructed between various groups of neurons in different regions of the brain. These systems are much more difficult to understand than a stack of vertebrae in the spinal column, but they are just as important. Now, because the human body is really complex, I'm not going to try to make a super detailed correlation between the human body and my categories here, but I just want to use images to kind of hint at what I'm saying. So in this essay, I'll discuss 3 microbiological systems within a religious organization. First, there's the cultural environment of images, music, ritual, practices, tastes, dispositions, and discourses. And I link it to the immune system, which maintains the integrity of the body by making distinctions between native and foreign elements, creating bodies that directly engage with the external environment. Second, there are localized relational networks of interpersonal influence. I liken these shifting, spontaneous relational connections between individual believers to the colonies of bacteria in the gut. Third, there is the ontological reality that is the work of shared religious endeavor, whereby that which cannot be seen or touched, the divine, is made real, almost tangible, and loyally taken for granted through constant acts of collective affirmation. I compare these to the neural networks of cells and synapses in the brain that store individuals' life experiences and hence their very sense of self and existence. Within the church, these microbiological systems facilitate women's pursuit of and influence over their collective religious existence. Now, while none of these three microbiological systems are inherently male or female, the example of Latter-day Saint women demonstrates how these cultural, relational, and ontological systems can significantly influence the entire body of the church. While the structure of formal, hierarchical authority is indisputably influential within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, without it, the church would resemble the iconic bowl of Jell-O on a hot day. It would be a serious mistake to name it as the only influential system within Mormonism, and by extension to say that Latter-day Saint women did not have access to systems of influence, or that a woman's participation in Latter-day Saint institutional and community life is only constraining and not enabling. Just as Saba Mahmood, in her study of Egyptian women, asked, what resources and capacities a pious lifestyle makes available, we might ask, what resources and capacities the microbiological systems of complex religious organization make available to Latter-day Saint women in their diverse situations around the world. Now, at the outset, I'll state two things that seem obvious about organized religious movements, but they're quite important to keep in mind. So, in the first place, religious organizations are organized, but notwithstanding religious claims to divine genesis and direction, they behave like other kinds of large organizations, subject to the same pressures and constraints that come with scale, geographic distribution, bureaucracy, and so on. No matter how many multi-million megawatts are available to leap down as divine power from on high, this power must still be conducted through a man-made network of people, held together by deadlines, meetings, schedules, telecommunications, flowcharts, and the like. In the second place, religious organizations are religious. They differ from political, civic, corporate, environmental, and other kinds of organizations in the particular orientation of their formation and ongoing life. For instance, while church doctrines contain strong theological and cultural strains emphasizing the equality of all before God, or reverence for the natural world, the church is not primarily oriented toward achieving equality for all humankind or saving the planet. Although many jockey for power and status within the church's internal political and cultural hierarchies, despite scriptural injunctions to humility and modesty, people who convert usually don't do so because they want to be the local stake president, insisting on a guarantee of free and fair elections before accepting baptism. Religious projects depend on religious logics to solve religious problems. These logics can be multiplex and contradictory, but they are ultimately rooted in a particular religion's distinctive claims and concerns. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints exemplifies both organizational and religious realities. Its highly centralized, bureaucratic, patriarchal structure has been compared by some scholars to a multinational corporation or even a Stalinist regime. Its exclusive religious claims assert the charismatic content of this bureaucracy. A separate structure exists for its volunteer-led local congregations that are generally open to more egalitarianism, culturally adaptive, and erratic in personnel. So Latter-day Saint women also present seeming contradictions, historically defending polygamy while fighting for women's rights, engaging in charismatic home practices while lobbying for social influence on the national and world stage. Mormon practice ticks the boxes on both sides of the usual binaries, rationalized yet charismatic, hierarchical yet grassroots, global yet American, cosmopolitan but provincial, heavily mediatized, yet also strikingly dependent on face-to-face interaction. So I don't think that the existence of microbiological organizational systems is unique to the Latter-day Saint tradition. It's just simply a useful example because it tends to evoke a knee-jerk reaction that highlights some common assumptions about structures and the exercise of power within religious organizations. So let me just talk about some of the research in these three categories of cultural, relational, and ontological authority that I think helps us to realize that we need to broaden our scope of vision. So I use in the microbiological analogy, culture is like a religion's immune system. The system of the body whose tasks are to determine friend from foe, innocuous from dangerous, inert from toxic, and which exhibits adaptive responses to changing environments. And similarly, a religion's cultural systems engage with the external environment, curating and regulating an internal environment of circulating ideas, images, objects, ritual practices, dress, dietary practices, dispositions, and other symbols in a given place and time. Now, as people who study the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints know, Mormons emphasize themselves as a peculiar people. Charles Cohen says, Mormons retain their distinctive sense of peoplehood, a strong and unyielding sense of who they know themselves to be that leads them to patrol their sociological boundaries. And here the relevant scholarship is the scholarship on the study of lived religion, pioneered by David Hall, and since become very popular in understanding informal practices within religion. Tona Hagen makes the point that since lived religion focuses not on formal structures but on the laity, if the laity comprises nearly everyone in Mormonism and leaders learn mainly by doing rather than through formal professional training, then lived Mormonism is, in that sense, the only kind there is. Now, I'm assuming that many of the members of this audience are familiar with the scholarship on Mormonism and lived religion, but let me just use Tona Hagen's description. She describes a vibrant culture always thrumming beneath the surface of official structures, where improvisation, resistance, blending, and creativity are found in abundance. She focuses on ways in which this lived religious culture shapes Latter-day Saint life. She notes especially that uncorrelated materials and autonomous approaches are especially prevalent in church lessons at the lowest levels of local organization. And I'd like to note here that those are usually the levels where you have the most participation by Mormon women, in children's and youth organizations and in private homes. Now, of particular significance is women's participation in primary, the church's organization for children, girls and boys. While there's many worldwide variations, official guides state that ideally primary is to be led by an all-female presidency, consisting of the primary president, 2 counselors, and a secretary. The leader and the pianist or music person are usually, though not always, female. The majority of teachers tend to be female, though it is common to have some male teachers, especially for older classes. In large congregations, it's often, though not always the case, that as in the Elkton Ward, documented by Susan Tabor, quote, of all the organizations in the ward, the primary has the largest staff. Now, beyond numerical mass, women are influential not so much for the doctrinal content of the lessons in primary, which are standardized in lesson manuals and repeated year after year, but for the strong, distinctive habitus they create. And habitus is like the milieu or the kind of cultural environment, the ways in which people are used to relating with each other. And numerous studies have noted Mormonism's communitarian collective corporate character, and I argue that this distinctive character, this distinctive way of being a people, starts in primary. The collective habits that shape these Latter-day Saint realities, both earthly and divine, do not arise spontaneously, but are the result of weekly training from a very young age, beginning in primary. Within primary, the female president models leadership and delegation, and her female counselors model leadership and deference to higher authority. Children learn to sit in chairs, to set up chairs in rows, to put chairs away in stacks, i.e. to transform their space for shared reception of an authoritative lesson. They learn to speak in public, to play a part in the cues of, play a part in group performance, to fulfill rotating assignments. They learn to sing in a group, obeying the cues of the music leader and altering the pitch of their individual voices to match the voices of the leader and their peers. As Christine Haglund has noted, mostly women have selected and composed primary songs, through which children absorb core theological ideas, doctrinal precepts, positive associations, and understanding about how to live their religion in everyday life. And here, Tona Hagen's observation about the uncorrelated nature of primary materials comes into practice. So these 4 pictures were taken of my children within the space of like 2 seconds. And over the course of 2 seconds, they did all these things to mess up the family photo shoot. So while an adult Sunday school teacher can probably get away with droning directly from the official church printed manual before an audience of adult Mormons, the interactive demands of teaching children involves the teacher's personality and that particular group of children's learning habits. It's primary, where local leaders, and usually women, most frequently do the work of translating centrally correlated directives into local idioms. And as I have argued elsewhere, it is often the case that instead of creating homogeneity, central authoritative structures provide justification or impetus for the creation of highly particularistic informal institutions within Latter-day Saint practice. Now I see that time is flying, even though I originally thought we wouldn't have enough time, so I'm going to skip ahead. So just riffing on this idea of culture as immunity, this intersects with Mormon women on a global level in a couple of ways. One way is when you consider women in the global south. You can think, for example, about the studies done by Elizabeth Briscoe on evangelical Christians in South America. And her observation was that in Colombia, conservative Christian women felt that the kind of notion of male headship and a Christian family was actually very empowering for them, because instead of condoning widely accepted male behaviors like drinking, gambling, and womanizing, it aligned the interests of the women and men to spend the family income on the children and to work together as a unit. Now, the kind of extreme version of, and so we could say this is a church system provides a kind of closed system or an internal system that is in some ways immune to outside culture, a separate system. Now, in the work of Jana Reese, which we've heard at this conference, we also see what we could see as a case of autoimmunity. So hyper vigilance about who is in and who is out, what is native and what is foreign. And Jana Reese notes that feeling judged was the #1 reason by former millennial Latter-day Saint women in the United States for leaving their faith. So that's why I have no hair. My hair just felt judged by my body. Okay, so we've got to move on here. So I'm going to talk about the next system, about relational systems. And I liken this to the invisible, populous, diverse, competing communities of microbes that occupy habitats such as the gut. Research shows the activities of the fluctuating populations of individual strains of microbes on and within the body are surprisingly consequential in human health. And the usefulness of this microbiome model for our understanding of religious systems is a model for how uncoordinated, somewhat unpredictable, fluid interactions of groups of individual believers can significantly affect a religious movement as a whole. In this section's emphasis on the messy, shifting state of affairs evoked by lowly colonies of microbes, exuberantly competing and reproducing as they digest insoluble fiber in the colon, I draw on work from the field of organization studies. So studies of organization provide numerous helpful analytical lenses for identifying various power structures and relations within religious movements. Now, one of the earliest theorists of organization was Max Weber, who identified 3 major sources of authority: rationalistic authority, traditional authority, and charismatic authority. And charismatic authority in particular has long been claimed by Mormon women and by women in religious movements more generally. As we heard from Lori Maffley-Kipp's lecture last night, this charismatic leadership of women healers, spirit mediums, and prophetesses is well documented, is all around us. So just to move a bit more quickly here, one model that I found particularly useful is a very influential model of organizational management theory that has been around for about 40 years, called the garbage can model. And I won't get into it because I don't have enough time. But the basic theory is also known as the organized anarchies model. And the basic idea is that people who study organizations have found that, in fact, the flow chart of the leader who makes decisions at the top, managing people in the middle who relay information up, that's kind of mythical. And what actually happens is these formal structures exist alongside participants' competing priorities, informal agendas, personal networks, and happenstance. They found that time constraints significantly shape the quality of actors' participation in planning and implementation. They say that inconsistent and chancy patterns of participation shape choice situations, such as how a problem is resolved may hinge on whether one or another participant happens to come to the meeting at which it is discussed. And I think we all know how that happens. Actually, this is very funny since we're at UVU. So the garbage can model was initiated through these people who did a study of university presidents. And that's where they came up with this idea that actually it was all just a big garbage can. So, but what organization theory does is it demonstrates through research, through modeling, and through data that these vertical structures are much less consequential than we tend to think they are, which I guess is pretty obvious. But that's why we have to have scholarship to show us that what we think is obvious is actually true. And it's relevant in the case of Latter-day Saint women because so often these kind of informal networks in which they participate are overlooked or discounted. So here are some other insights from organization theory. People have studied personal networks. People have analyzed actors within organizations and found that those who are central within their networks are those who have the most power, prestige, and effectiveness. And you might automatically think, well, that means that, President Nelson's the most important person because everyone, is central around him. But when you think about the networks that exist within Mormonism, again, as I look at my aunties and cousin, there are women, Mormon women are at the center of so many of these networks that hold Latter-day Saint communities together. Other studies have found that social embeddedness affects the religious activity and religious beliefs of congregational members. And by social embeddedness, they mean the strength of social networks within a religious congregation. So those social networks are not just people chatting in the foyer. They're not just like frothy social ornamentation. They are consequential, and they shape religious activity and religious belief. Other studies of large, complex organizations have noted that there are a multiplicity of logics within an organization, meaning that logics, values, can contradict each other, sending conflicting or confusing signals about meaning or values to institutional inhabitants. Contradictory logics provide actors embedded in these complex social structures with a choice of which logic or logics to focus on when taking action. And I think we all know that that is pretty relevant as well within a Latter-day Saint context, certainly within a parenting context when your children argue with you. So the last system I'd like to mention here is the system comprised of what we believe, what we think is real, and that's ontology. And the analogy here is the networks of neurons and synapses in the brain that store individuals' memories, and thus a sense of self and of existing as an individual, unique personality. And in our analogy, they represent the ontological project. Above all else, religious organizations arise and are perpetuated out of, sorry, I just lost my place. They're perpetuated out of believers' collective desire to claim and perpetuate an extraordinary event or idea. One person's special experience, such as a divine vision or a heavenly voice, comes to be known and valued by others who organize a religious community to protect and reproduce this special experience. And this is the insight of Ann Taves. Talal Assad, another influential religious studies theorist, notes that structures of power such as laws, schools, families, and so on create the conditions for experiencing particular religious truths. If I had been born in a different family, if I had been born in a different place, I would probably have very different religious beliefs. And most interestingly, for the purpose of this paper, Tanya Luhrmann's work, she's an anthropologist who studies religious experience, shows that the process by which people come to experience divine power involves acquiring a skill that can be learned in the body and in the mind through repeated training and effort. So if you have questions about what I mean by that, we can get to it in the question and answer sections. There's this really interesting discussion of Tanya Luhrmann's study. I'll just summarize it. She found that studies who engaged in certain, I'll restart. Tanya Luhrmann conducted a study of subjects who were evangelical Christians. And those evangelical Christians who engaged in cataphatic discipline, that is, guided imagination on the life of Christ as described in the Gospels, improved in tests of mental imagery and vividness, and became significantly more likely to say that they had had a near tangible experience of God's presence and that God had spoken to them at last. So through this discipline that they practiced, they actually had more charismatic experiences of God compared to other people who had not done that same training. So her point is that religious experience can be learned. And where do Latter-day Saints learn how to experience God? I think it's quite important to, she notes the power, Luhrmann notes the power of sensory engagement and imagination to facilitate people's experience of religion as reality. And of course, in their work in primary and in their homes, Latter-day Saint women control the realm of Mormon spiritual training that is most dominated by images, imagination, movement, sensory stimulation, and bodily discipline. So because their students are young children, teachers may utilize a range of ingenious methods, use props to keep and hold the children's attention. In gospel lessons, they tell stories with the help of images and objects, encourage kinetic participation in learning activities, and train children to adopt certain bodily postures and even emotional modes in order to maintain reverence. During singing time, they train children to join their breath and energy in shaped musical melodies and to commit to remember the lyrics of songs containing theological messages. And it's significant that when church worship services transitioned from 3 hours to 2 hours recently, the only Sunday block of time that was untouched, untruncated, and unreduced was primary singing time. And this attests, I think, to leaders' understanding of the value of singing time in the formation of Latter-day Saints. It is the most sensorially and kinetically engaging of all modes of Sunday theological instruction, with tremendous power to permanently shape values, identity, and spiritual dispositions. So I've talked about these cultural, relational, and ontological systems, and I've spoken about these things quite theoretically, relying on other people's scholarship. I don't have a lot of my own data. I just like to share today 3 unscientific examples, and by unscientific I mean I haven't conducted exhaustive studies with control groups. These are anecdotal examples from my own life, and that make me that confirm in my mind these ideas of the power of these things. So I'm going to give you an unscientific example. You are going to be part of this example. Okay, are you ready? If you don't know what to do, then just enjoy everything. If you know what to do, then do it. Okay? I looked out the window and what did I see? Popcorn popping on the apricot tree. Spring has brought me such a nice surprise. Popcorn popping right before my eyes. I can take an armful and make a treat. A popcorn bowl that would smell so sweet. It wasn't really so, but it seemed to be. Popcorn popping on the apricot tree. So that was actually a rather extraordinary performance. I saw many people doing things, and it's almost like you just had to do it. So you were kinetically engaged. I didn't say anything. You got up. You moved around. You did kind of silly things. You were smiling. I think I changed the mood in the room. And that's very powerful. I'm going to do something else. All right, ready? Stand. One, two, three. Whenever I hear the song of a bird or look at the blue, blue sky, whenever I feel the rain on my face or the wind as it rushes by, whenever I touch a velvet rose or walk by a lilac tree, I'm glad that I live in this beautiful world Heavenly Father created for me. She gave me my eyes that I might see the color of butterfly wings. She gave me my ears that I I know Heavenly Mother loves me. So there was another change in the room. That's the power of culture. And that is learned in primary. This was a primary song. I have another example here. We don't really have a lot of time to do, but I just want to show just a Mormon song that has gone viral is Blake Gillette's I Will Be What I Believe. Has anyone heard of this song? Okay. Will this thing play internet clips? Oh, it will.
Living in this world.
Okay. Can someone figure out how to turn the volume down? Are you doing that, Brian? Okay. So it's this song. It's this song by Blake Gillette. It's a non-correlated primary song. And I'll just play you a little bit just so you get a feeling of this song.
With change all
Oh, you can't see
around,
it.
but with the prophet's words, I'll stand on solid ground, even though it's still hard, with questions that are I will say, I'll have faith like Brother Joseph and the strength of the pioneers. I'll be brave as a stripling warrior and like Nephi persevere. I will spread God's love to all I know and serve. I will plead with my Father on my knees. I will be what I believe.
So this song became a kind of phenomenon in primary music circles. Oh, I just closed PowerPoint. So it was performed in many places, and I actually saw it in Shanghai. And then from Shanghai, I came back to my congregation in Auckland. I found that people in Auckland were learning it as well. So then the people in my stake decided to make a music video that was an emulation of, but also like subtly better than the Utah music video. So I'm going to play that for you here. I just want you to notice the difference in the production value is definitely different, but in the kids and the feeling of the thing.
Living in this world with change all around, but with the prophet's words, I will stand on solid ground, even though it's still hard, with questions that arise every day. I will say,
Notice the change in the lyrics in the chorus.
I'll have faith like Brother Joseph and the strength of the pioneers. I'll be brave like Mother Eve and the guest and persevere. I will spread God's love.
Okay, so it was hard to hear, but they said I'll be brave like Mother Eve and like Esther persevere. So in this situation, they adapted the lyrics with the composer's permission to include more women. And actually, he's told me that people all over the world have contacted him and said, can we use different people like, women pioneers, Sister Emma, Soraya, all these different kinds of women. And all over the world, people are singing this song, but having adapted the lyrics to their audiences and their people. So this is just an example of this kind of contagious culture that is very powerful and that changes every time it moves to a different place, depending on who's there and who's available and what the audience is. So in conclusion, The last kind of personal example from ontology, so I've given examples of the song. The primary song was an example of the power of culture. This viral spread of this video and this readaptation and repurposing through various channels is an example of relational networks. And the last horizontal system that I think is quite significant is ontological systems. And I'll share a personal example. So when I was in the middle of colon cancer treatments, I found that it was so much easier. Sorry, I'm getting emotional here. I found it was so much easier to have faith in other people's faith than to have faith myself. For some reason, it was just easier. It seemed more certain, even though there were people who were further away from the situation theoretically. And I've reflected on that, on how to maintain this reality where God exists and is mindful of us. We need other people. And I couldn't have faith, I cannot have faith all by myself. It is, for me at least, a fragile flame that I must often borrow from others to relight my own lamp. And so just in conclusion, I'd like to say that these Mormon women's exclusion from formal line authority management does not prevent us, from powerfully shaping the world in which all Latter-day Saints live. Cultural symbols, modes, markers of belonging are networks of relational influence and are distinctive ontological possibilities. Religious organizations, by virtue of their organizational and religious character, open up fields of actions that go beyond advancement in formal administrative hierarchy. Since our subject is participation of living beings in a collective religious project, we must explore not only narratives of constraint and control that are heavily influenced by our ideals for political governance, but also narratives of possibility and enterprise that are clearly a reality for the women who participate in Mormonism and other patriarchal religious systems. While structural inequality within religious organizations is indeed extremely significant and something that I personally believe limits women's flourishing, it is short-sighted to focus only on structural, vertical, easily visible power. We must begin to appreciate the power of horizontal, less visible systems that define and animate the religious project and within which women shape the worlds in which they live. Thank you. Did I go to the end of the time? We have no time for questions, I realize.
Let's just take a couple if we've got.
Okay, do we have any questions? Yes.
Please wait for the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Melissa, I'd like to thank you for that stunning paper. My question is, this video that has gone viral, the changes that are being made to it, are they being made by women? Are these women in primary organizations? Okay.
Well, and also young women's. Blake said all sorts of women contact him and ask. Okay. And they've actually affected that, like this interest in having female characters in that song has affected his work on another creative project, which is a Book of Mormon musical. Not that other Book of Mormon musical, another Book of Mormon musical, in which he's working really hard to have more female characters. So there's a contagion here, I feel.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Melissa. That was really, really interesting and good. I mean, you and I had talked about this before, but I hadn't seen the slides and such. And I think it's really important to find ways to give, I mean, as we talked about before, to articulate the kinds of systems that we don't usually know how to name or know, we don't have a language for them often. You know, you and I talked about how there are times when women in a room will just understand there's some kind of emotional current running through, and the men in the room have no idea what's going on. And it's not always the case, but there are certain kinds of things that it's just hard to know how to name. My question for you is whether there are ways, I mean, all systems, all religious systems, all particularly hierarchical systems, both constrain and liberate, right? Have possibilities for both, and I'm glad you sort of for the way you said that. I wonder, though, if there are ways that you see these systems that we're beginning to name, you're beginning to map out, also interact with the power structure and change it. I mean, it seems like, so one possibility here is there's no way to change any of this. There's just these different systems working in different sorts of ways. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the interaction between that structure, the vertical structure, and these other kinds of horizontal systems.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a really great question, and there's definitely interaction. So one good example would be the kind of intersection of Jana Risa's work on doubt and this kind of conversations that are happening online about questions. You saw the institutional church put out gospel topics essays, which directly spoke to that. There was a document that went around online called the CES letter. That is now a fixture in the minds of most Mormon administrators as well. And thinking of responses to that. And often the ways in which the institutional church has sought to respond has kind of tried to emulate these horizontal networks like social media. They've taken major firesides onto social media. They've called them, face-to-faces. They've done Facebook Lives. And so there seems to be, there's clearly an awareness of these different systems, and they do interact. That's just one example.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, good. So my imagination is sort of flooded with examples of like women who have had this enormous impact in this sort of horizontal way, going as far back as, Emma giving us the Relief Society and the Word of Wisdom, and and like Beverly Campbell changing Doctrine of the Fall by writing an allegedly safe book that Deseret Book would publish or whatever. But in particular, I can't stop thinking about Naomi Randall because of like the examples that you give. Like she wrote "I'm a Child of God." She chaired the committee that gave us the CTR ring, and she basically invented reverence as not just like a sort of a set of activities, but like as something to be consciously cultivated as like a primary cardinal virtue in children.
You mean is not quietly sitting, but thinking of Father above.
Exactly.
Feeling I get when I think of
like
his blessing.
Yeah, like she basically encoded reverence for us. Like, I'm not even going to ask if she's the most influential Mormon of the last century. I'm gonna say, is second place even close? But that does raise I think an important question, which is the question I actually want to ask, which is there a way for us to productively acknowledge women's influence, not just acknowledge, but celebrate, like really flesh out and see as much as we can women's influence that doesn't, like outside of these sort of traditional male-centric power structures, without simultaneously reaffirming those male-centric
like
power
ruining them by
structures.
ranking people in a top 100 list.
Right, because that would be or like even just me saying like she's the winner,
Right.
like how what's a productive? I'm sure you've thought about this. What's a productive way for us to talk about these different kinds of power without ultimately affirming their difference in a way that says the status quo is fine?
Well, I think just as a beginning, we can just name them and point to the significance of their contributions. I mean, the problem is, as you observe, it's just like things that we kind of know are super obvious and very influential. It's just hard to kind of put a finger on how they're influential. So I think the more naming that we do, and the more we invoke like work that's been done on other religious traditions or on other ways of interacting. Lori and I were having a conversation last night about how maybe studies of like women's networks would give us some kind of more of a theoretical base to have these conversations. I just think looking broadly to all kinds of different disciplines and forms of inquiry will help us to name these things and to develop a taxonomy for them.